Okay, so you can see I have my fire going behind me. Oftentimes I like to have a fire when I'm sitting here in the backyard. So we'll let that burn and I'll give you a little tour of the backyard here. And the main feature that we will look at is this structure right behind me. So you can probably already guess what it is, but we will look at that in more detail as well as some of the landscaping. It recently snowed here maybe a week ago, and it's been above freezing, which is abnormal for this time of year. So the yard looks basically like it would look like in spring. Looks a little out of sorts. Definitely could use a cleanup, but we are expecting more snow, so a lot of the nice refined look that you would normally get will have to wait for another season. So let's take a look at this shed. Okay, starting from the fire pit, if you've seen my other videos, you've seen the backyard already. But if this is your first video, welcome. And I'll give you a pano here just to give you context for the layout of things. In a previous video, I did show my sauna, so most of you would already have seen that. It's a fairly nice sized lot in this city, a little bigger than most lots in the suburbs. And these suburbs were basically developed in the late 1940s and into the 1950s, post World War II. So there's quite a bit of space. The main feature back here that we're going to look at is this shed. I call it my barn shed. And if you remember from the sauna video, homeowners are allowed 2 accessory structures besides the house. That's assuming that the garage is connected to the house, which fortunately mine is. If it was its own standalone garage, then I could only build one of these. And the current regulations are for 200 square feet or less for non-permitted buildings. So this building here, I was able to build without a permit, which was really nice, although I had the neighbors call a few times and the inspector came over anyway and he verified that it was all fine and according to not only code, but the non-permit specs. So I got the inspector's approval anyway. Really nice guy. So in the backyard here, we're connected to the alley, and I'm pretty happy with this alley. It's usually nice and quiet, gives me a little bit more space in the backyard to, I don't know, hang out, drive. Sometimes I'll back my truck into the backyard here and unload things. But there's my fire pit, and the shed here is just a simple lean-to construction. And in the same way that I left the rafters exposed on the sauna, I decided to do that on the shed as well. And then I did the same black corrugated metal roof. So I did build this after I built the sauna, and this was all just open space here. So it was a nice spot for it. I did have to build up quite a bit on this side, closer to the garage here. As you can see, there's a drop down to the garage level. So I brought in, I think, 6 yards of class 5. Class 5 crushed rock is this rock here. This was an additional pad that I put back here for the mobile sauna I built, which hopefully I'll be able to make a video on that. But that's class 5. And the reason that I have the landscaping done this way is to get water as far away from the house as possible. And so in order to do that, I had to dig out a lot just to get a good slope away from the house so that the water drained away from the foundation. So what I had to do as part of that was dig down, which is where you see the landscape rock there. Dug a swale, that's called a swale, and that's the low point for the water to collect. Probably don't necessarily need that there. I definitely wanted to get the water away from the house, at least to this point, because as you've seen in previous videos, the house is probably 25, 30 feet that direction. And the nice thing about where I live is the dirt is very sandy and porous. So there's not a lot of clay here, which means the rain absorbs really quickly. So I hardly ever get any kind of flooding unless it's just a downpour, or maybe a little bit in the spring with the snow melt. But even then, it all drains out pretty quickly. So I never really have water issues. But I went overkill anyway and made the grade come to this swale, and then that provides the edge for the broader foundation for the shed. So we'll walk around here and kind of talk about it as we go. So like I said, those are actually 2x8 rafters. I just built another shed like this, but I use 2x6s. If you just look on a span chart in any of your residential code books, you'll be able to find tables that talk about the lumber dimensions, the wood species, and how far you can basically have a span for it to carry a certain load. And 2x6 is plenty. In fact, my house, which we'll look at in another video, that's all 2x4. So even the roof is 2x4 construction, and that's held up since 1948. So definitely went a little overkill, but I did want to hang stuff from it on the inside. It's primarily a storage shed, which means I didn't insulate it. There's no internal wall coverings. The wood you see here is the wood you see from the inside. So what I did with the wood is, and I'll show pictures at the end of this video so you can see the interior construction. It's basically post framed, but I did put it on 4x6 green treated timbers, the same foundation that I did for the sauna. So here's another angle. You can see how the layout is. There's the sauna and then the shed here. And I have about a 2-foot overhang on the top and bottom ends, and same siding all around. What I did here with the rock is, again, similar concept for the sauna too. I wanted to provide a back fill just so that that 4x6 foundation stays in place real secure. It's not going to splay out for any reason. I don't know if it was exactly necessary, but that's what I chose to do, and I like the aesthetic of it too. So as you can tell, I like rocks, big rocks, filler rock, flat rock, flagstone. I think it's a nice way to do landscaping. And since we're on this side, I've been slowly filling up my grass with mulch, because with the soil being so sandy, it's actually really not nutritious at all for growing things. So in an effort to partly enrich the soil, but also to minimize the amount of mowing I got to do, I decided to put down a layer of mulch. And that'll have to be filled in next year a little more as well, just to keep up with weeds and things growing in it. But most of the backyard is now mulch. And of course, there are a lot of leaves here, and those will get cleaned up in the springtime, as this is a difficult time of year to stay on top of that stuff. And this fence is actually a really nice fence that the neighbor built, all cedar, and it really complements the shed here and some of the backyard aesthetic that I went with. You can't quite see, but you should be able to tell the roof there is the same roof as the sauna. So, like I said, for the siding, obviously you can tell it's burned. I used the torch again on this, and I put 1x12s up, and for the first year and a half, I didn't have any of these middle skinnier boards. These are called battens. So it's a board and batten. Board would be referring to the larger flat board, and the batten is the seam cover, that board. And I put those up and then burned them in place. So when you burn them in place, for the most part, the flame goes out even after it's all charred. But it's wise to keep a hose and just hose it all down with water when you finish burning, because some corners of the wood and stuff will generate embers, and it'll just keep eating away. So that's one tip for you if you're gonna do any burning for treating the exterior surface. The char does wear out over time. As you can tell, the sauna doesn't quite pop the same that it did when it was freshly burned. The char just weathers off, but you can reburn it. So this I actually did reburn when I put the battens on, and those are 1x4s. So with that dimension, if you don't know, a 1x4 is 3/4 inch thick by 3.5 wide, and the 1x12 is 3/4 inch thick, but it's actually about 11 inches and 1/4, or 11 1/4 inches. So maybe in another couple years I'll give it another reburn, but it's a really nice way to weatherproof. And the other nice feature about it is that it's insect proof, and it's also woodpecker proof. So proof of that is with these rafters sticking out on the eaves there. I watched one day as a woodpecker, I think it was a downy woodpecker, he literally went, I want to say from pretty close on this end, he went from each rafter, pecked at it, flew to the next one, pecked at it, flew to the next one, and he did that all the way down till the end, and only gave a few pecks on each one. So he was looking looking for rot or insects or something, but I assumed that he also found that some ash got on his beak and didn't taste very good. So it keeps the birds out, keeps the insects down. I have had some bees nests or bees hives up in there, but they don't last very long. Usually I get on it right away, and I don't have issues with bees. So I do have trim in addition to the battens, and then you probably can't really tell, but if you look closely, I have a window here, which is just an opening, and there's a string tied to it, so I can pull that string from the inside and open this window. I guess you maybe would call it more of a hatch door or a louvered type opening, but I have 3 of those, but they blend in really well. It's really hard to tell they're there unless they're open. But that's just nice to get some extra sunlight in there in the summer months. If I'm working in there or have to get something, just keeps a nice breeze going and lightens it up a bit. The trim I decided not to really do anything with. I didn't want to burn it, just to give it a little accent. And then also I wanted to see over time what happens if you just leave it raw, no sealer, no varnish or anything like that. And you can see the nail heads start to rust and they weep down the side of the wood. But other than that, the wood itself is still just as soft or hard as it was maybe 3 years ago now when I put that up. So that's pine, so it is soft. You saw the scratch marks, but the weeping nail heads I actually really like. I like that kind of, as I have said before in different videos, the rustic raw look. Don't want it too finished, but I also want it all to tie together so it looks refined and nice too. And then you can see the doors. I custom built these to fit the size. These doors are each, I want to say 36 inches. So I made them pretty wide, not quite 40, In fact, they might even be 40 inches. I can't remember right now, but I made them the same size. Nice to have one on this end with a deadbolt. So I just put in a deadbolt and then a handle, nothing that turns. And then coming over here, you can see the other door. Same construction. This one gets more sun exposure, so the char wears off more easily. But same design. The only feature I'm going to add, because the snow does blow in, is some weather stripping on the sides here and the bottom, just because there is a crack and snow blows in. So that'll be the only addition to really make this complete. Some of you might be wondering what that cross board there is, and it's a strong back, and the function it has is just to keep the door straight from warping, because it is exposed to the sun, and it's all pine, so it's not particularly hardwood. The door does warp a tiny bit, so it just didn't shut quite as tightly as I would have liked, although it was still fine. But I decided, hey, we'll add this strong back on, straighten the door out, and not worry about the look. It's just part of the history of the piece, and rather than making a new door or finding a different wood to make one with, that's a solution that works. So I did put some braces here for the eave on the sides, and those cross members are basically holding this end rafter. So I don't really need these braces, but they are kind of a nice added look, and they do support the weight. So, and then I have my power lines here, so I put a little fork here to hold them up so they're not rubbing on the roof and losing any of their coating. So that kind of explains what some of those are. But other than that, it's kind of a nice, bold building in the back of the yard. And you probably saw it in the previous videos, but that gives you a full round tour. And I won't take you inside because it is storage. I have a lot of tools and things. Hard to move around right now. So I'll show you some pictures and you'll be able to get a good look at what the interior construction is like. But essentially it is weatherproof, certainly from the top. There are some knot holes that leak air and light, so it's not fully sealed off, but perfect for a shed. So we'll give you another view here, come back to see how the fire is doing. I might have to tend that. Otherwise, there is the fire burned shed that actually, if you insulated it and did the proper construction, could be a tiny house. It's big enough for that. But there you go. And here are some pictures of the construction process going back in time. You can see there's different phases that I went through. And here's the inside with a platform, which is very handy for storing things. The final stage basically looks like these pictures, except the floors are now pavers. So the inside didn't really change. I didn't feel any need to burn the walls or anything. The construction is post frame, basically built a box, and then on top of the box, I built a kicker wall and leaned the rafters on that, which you can see. And of course, I had to notch the rafters out to fit snugly on there, and put them on sawhorses and just made replicas of each rafter so they're all uniform. And you can see it's all tied securely to the 4x6 beams, which are fastened to the ground pretty well. And that's your foundation right there, that last picture.